So today what we're going to do is start to understand exactly what an argument is, what's different from an argument, from an explanation, just an exclamatory sentence, and how do you figure out a point? Like, in other words, the first thing that we really want to do is try to find or detect what exactly is being said. Have you ever been in a discussion with somebody and they didn't get your point? It's frustrating, right? If you read something and you didn't get the point, we're kind of missing what they're saying also. There's always two things that happens here. It's like I'm a big analogy person. I don't know, maybe it's just because of my visual, background. So I use analogies like, okay, so life's like baseball, and then you try to make a point that sometimes you get a home run, sometimes you only get the first. Sometimes people beat up your analogy, right? Then they'll try to bring up, well, those other aspects, this happens. They take every little tidbit that can be associated with baseball, and they try to use it to destroy your analogy. That's one frustration. Another frustration is that when you try to say something, people start arguing the peripheral stuff, and they're not getting what your point was. So what we want to try to do is be really good at reading something and saying, that's what they're trying to say. So what I would like you to do, and I'm not going to read it for you, is can you read that short paragraph and then tell me which one of those 4 bullet points represents the point, or what is it that they're trying to say? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's usually up front. It's not always the first line, but it's usually pretty far up front. They don't usually bury them at the bottom. What do you think? Where's the brave ones? Oh, you're going for it. See, if this were an auction, you would have already bought something. Yeah.
I was 17 too.
Which one?
Second one, the last one.
This one?
Second one.
This one? No.
Last one.
No. That's a good way to do it, though.
Is it the third one?
It is. All right? In other words, you have to almost try. Let me just say up front, there is no mechanical way to do this. This is a thing that you get a feel for. Over time, you just get a sense for how things put things together, and you start to try to use your own inflections to ferret it out. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like this: "You live each day as it was your last. Someday you most certainly be right." Everything else is going to flow from that. All right. And that doesn't mean the other things aren't important, right? It's just that it means this was his whole point. So we use colloquial terms today. I don't remember this when I was younger, but we'll say, like, what's the takeaway? So you even hear people who teach, they're supposed to sum it up in the end. Or if you ever watch TED Talks, right? I mean, everybody watch TED Talks? They're almost like canned, the way that they maneuver themselves, but they walk you through a very strict formula, and they're always going to tell you what we just did, so that you get that. But in the day gone by, it was something that we got better at just by ferreting it out by looking at it. So yes, that was it. Let's try another one. Ellen DeGeneres. I'll let you read it, and then tell me which one of those was her point. And they might all be good points. Yes?
Is it the first one?
No, but not a half bad guess.
The last one?
No. We're whittling them down. It is. Try to look up front, okay? Now, the other things are good things. But if you're listening to this, what she's starting out, look, as you grow, your idea of success is going to change. All the other things are good points, but they become things that support that conclusion, all right? So she's starting out with that. In other words, it matters to follow your passion and stay true to yourself. I don't know about the 20 shots of tequila, but live your life as an honest, compassionate person. All those good things, but they themselves couldn't be the overarching point, because they couldn't contain that.
So it's more about looking at how they start the argument than end it?
Often, it's not always the first sentence, but yes. You know, usually you're going to, I mean, if they're any good at what they're doing, they're starting out by making their point as they initialize their, well, in this particular instance, a commencement speech. Okay, so let's move on to something else here. Let's see if we can detect what's being argued. And oftentimes you're going to look for keywords, or you're going to try to determine where could they be, like the therefores. So I say, well, in my opinion. Even if they use words like an opinion, they might just be being modest, but they're getting ready to say something per se, okay? So what we're going to do here is it even an argument? Because sometimes people will respond to you, or people will say something and then look at you. And they're looking at you from some sort of response, but there's no response you can really give, okay? And I'll show you what I mean by that. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to do this first. I didn't realize this was up. I'm going to let you, well, I'll read it for you. Barack Obama, I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam where they appear. You know, just as Muslims don't fit a crude stereotype, America is not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire. Born on a revolution, founded on the ideal that all are created equal. We've shed blood and struggled for centuries. Within our borders and also around the world. We're shaped by other cultures, drawn from every end of the earth, dedicated to the pluribus unum. Of those 4 bullet points, which one of those do you think is his point? What is his conclusion? Now, what we're going to do here, and we're doing this systematically, but we're going to try to build the argument that he's made. And then totally forget whether you agree or not. When we do logic and critical thinking, we try to be disinterested. So what we will do is once we determine what his point is, and we look at his premises, then we're going to look at what's the best argument against what he just said. Okay?
Is it the last
Let me see. No, but not a half bad guess.
First,
No. Yes. It's not easy, is it? His whole point was, look, we're not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire. Now, why is this stuff important? If this were a logic course, or just a critical thinking course, I would send you home to go watch or read news articles or watch the news. Oftentimes, people never respond to the point. They respond to all the peripheral stuff. Especially if you see any hot button issues show up, like there's some mention of Muslims and being disrespected, somebody might lounge into that. But that wasn't his point. He's trying to make a different point here. So if we don't know what exactly the point is, then we don't really know, first of all, whether we might concur or whether we might not. And if we don't really agree, what would be a good argument against that? So that's what we're going to look at. But what we're going to look at now is, what do you think would be 2 of the premises? So which 2 of those bullet points do you think he used to reach the conclusion that America is not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire? Now you're seeing a lot of the same statements that were in the previous grouping. What do you think? Kind of think like bump, but a bump, but a bump. Give me one.
1,
Yep, one is. Let me make sure I know the numbers on them. Yeah.
4?
Not 4, but that's not a half bad.
3,
3. Yes. So let's look and see how he would have put this together. In his mind, he must have been thinking, look, we're founded upon this idea that we're all created equal, and we're dedicated to this concept of one out of many. So if those are the 2 premises, right? That's what we want people to know about us as the United States, says Barack Obama. Well, if you agree with those 2 things, then we're really not the crude stereotype of the self-interested empire. Because those are the 2 things that we hold dear. So remember, the conclusion is the truth statement of the argument that he's working towards, and he's using the 2 premises that are supposed to support his conclusion. So you can almost hear how he would work those out. Look, we're founded upon this ideal that we're created equal. It's out of many one. Therefore, we're not the crude empire you think we are. You can almost hear if he would put it into that term strictly. Okay? Now that we know that, Which one of those two do you think would be the best argument against him? And again, it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. We're trying to be or disinterested here per se. What do you think? Yeah. It's a lot better. In other words, you might say, okay, point taken. Yep, we're not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire, but we rarely live up to the ideals that we profess. And forget about agreeing or disagreeing. It wouldn't be a half-out argument against it. And if you were on, could you imagine though how nice of a conversation this would be in the news, right? If somebody were making this argument and you listened and you understood their point and you didn't go after something that was peripheral, you went after the exact conclusion they did, and perhaps you even asked them to support it. Are you saying, like repeat back that these two premises lead? Yeah, okay, fine. Maybe we're not this, crude stereotype, but do we always live up to our ideals? You might say, well, no. And now you're having a good conversation and an actual argument, not a quarrel. But you're arguing against the actual point that was trying to be made, not some peripheral thing. So again, if you ever find yourself frustrated when you're having a discussion with somebody, and you start out by saying that's not what I'm trying to say, or you're trying to say something and somebody in a childlike way might deflect, and now next thing you know you're arguing something peripheral, okay? It's something that you get good at just by practice. It's not, again, you can't just say, here's the mechanical way to always ferret this out. The only thing I can give you, as a general rule, is usually the conclusion is pretty far up in the paragraph. So if I were starting to read this, he's talking about his responsibility as president, but I can't imagine that's the whole point of what he's trying to say. And he talks about Muslims not fitting the crude stereotype. But wait, he's trying to defend America. He doesn't want us to be that crude stereotype, which would include making Muslims not, fostering that crude stereotype, because we don't want to do it, right? So you start to kind of figure out how he's trying to make his arguments. All right. Now, when you see something, a statement, or whatever it might be, a set of propositions, you have to start asking yourself, are they actually reasoning something out? Are they really trying to reach some sort of conclusion? Is this just an exclamatory sentence? Are they just explaining something? All right? Let me give you an example. Every time someone has high cholesterol or elevated blood sugar levels, right away the doctors write a script. They're in bed with Big Pharma. Now, if somebody says that to you, well, what can you say back? Their conclusion, right? They're in bed with Big Pharma. But they've given you nothing to support that. It's just a dogmatic statement, right? You might as well simply say, why do you believe in the Bible? Because God wrote it. I mean, there's nowhere to go with that. You can affirm it, yeah, or you can say, I don't think so. But there's really nowhere else to go with that. I was in a conversation and somebody said, well, I don't believe in God. I think that's all bullshit. There's nothing there to drag me into. What do you want me to do with that? Are you asking me to argue why I should or should not? So we have to be careful. Are we even talking about something at that point? And with this particular thing, it's just an emotive statement. There's no premises. It's not like the person laid an argument out. You could do that, right? I mean, maybe that's the intention. Maybe they're going to try to say that, there's pharmaceutical companies that have drug reps out and they push the drugs that are more marketable and have a higher profit level, and they're pushing them more. They keep lowering, the threshold, what somebody might qualify, not qualify, but maybe perhaps go on to that medicine, and who wins in the end, Big Pharma. You could probably build that in an argument, but at this point, nothing's been done. So my suggestion is you don't say anything. You just okay, that's what you think. But all they really did is offer you an opinion. When people go for brisk walks in the hot summer, they tend to sweat quite a bit. Is there anything there you can do? Can you do anything except affirm or deny that? You can't really tell you why, right? I mean, maybe it's implicit if it's, the sun's out, but nobody's really making an argument there. It's just an explanation. It's almost as if person came into the room wet because it's raining outside. There's nothing really there for a person to respond to. Now, these might seem simplistic to you, and you might feel like, well, duh. But I didn't want, again, since this is not a logic course per se, we're just having a day or two of it before we get into the meat of it, I wanted to give you ones that were simple so you get it. But that being said, let's go back and look at how we can form that in an argument if I really wanted to, right? I could say, well, isn't it true people who do physical work tend to sweat more? Well, Tom, he's doing physical work in the heat, and therefore Tom's going to sweat more. You could form the thing in an argument. But if somebody were to at least say that to you, you could put that together in your head and say, well, is the logic right? If the propositions are true, then the conclusion's true, and then the logic's right, then it's valid, and it's true, and you really can't argue. You can't say, no, I don't think so. But at least there's something to respond. You could go beyond just affirming an exclamatory sentence, all right? Again, I'm just trying to be illustrative. These aren't things per se that I'm going to have you do when they're, I want to say, in the midterm. All right. Now, I'm going to show you this one, and I'm going to tell you something about it. Not about this, but just about logic per se overall. Here's one. It's true, as research has shown, that when individuals engage in aerobic exercise for 30 minutes per day, the risk for cardiovascular disease is less. And I suggest you begin a regular exercise regime to keep your heart healthy. Where I pulled this from, they said that wasn't an argument. I thought it was an argument. Seems to be an argument to me, all right? I don't want you to think that some of this is subjective. All I'm trying to say is that some of this could be a person's perspective. So, in a logic course, you spend more time trying to define exactly what we're looking for. And something like this, I'm trying to be a little more obvious because, some of you, even if you go into nursing, all right, some of you might be a teacher someday. And you're going to try to take all the good experiences you had and you're going to try to explicate those, and the bad ones you had, you're going to try to get rid of those. I had some pretty bad, experiences with logic professors in the past, especially with fallacies, where, no matter how much we argued, it was so, ambiguous, I couldn't see it the way he did, and others couldn't either, but the guy's like, no, that's it. So when I read this, the person in this text said that was an explanation. I didn't see it that way. I thought this was an argument. And to kind of prove my own point, I put it, you don't need to write all this stuff down, but I put it into some sort of syllogistic form, just so that I can show myself that I can form this as an argument. So I don't know exactly what the other person is saying. But I could, make the major premise, people engage in aerobic exercise to keep their heart healthy. Beginning a regular exercise regime should include engaging in aerobic exercise. Beginning a regular exercise regime will keep your heart healthy. You see how I took these two terms? I took the middle term and got them distributed at least once. I took the subject and the minor premise and made it the subject and the conclusion. I took the predicate and the minor premise and made it the premise and the major, made it the predicate and the major premise. So you can work this type of stuff out, all right? Now, again, nobody does this in normal speech. What we get good at is we get good to something on the back of our heads. The one, I can't use more than 3 terms. I have to make sure that I'm not putting some, in one of the premises and then trying to use all in the conclusion. These types of things that might seem obvious, but again, if I sent you home and said I want you to look over, the news program for half an hour, you'd come out with a load of these things, okay? All right, let's leave that. Now what I want to do is fallacies. When you don't know if the word or the term is how it's being used, it creates confusion. Now, in normal speech, we could always try to ferret this out by asking further questions, but the reality is oftentimes things are in print or we're watching the news and we're not quite sure exactly what they meant by that. So let me ask you something. Here's a sentence. What is the hardest course at Villanova? Now, I'm not looking for an answer. What I'm looking for is, what does that mean? What do you think it means? What are your choices? What would make something the hardest course?
A course where a few people hitting.
Okay. It's not a course that people score very high. What else?
Like how much time you spend outside of class.
Yeah. It could be that it's hard. It requires a lot of time.
If you need to get like a tutor or something.
Could be,
Like how higher level the material is?
absolutely, it could be higher level. Somebody from the last period said maybe it's difficult to get into, it's a coveted course or such. You know, in other words, what we are looking for, remember the terms, we're looking for terms that are exact, we're looking for terms that are clear, we're looking for terms that are unambiguous, right? So if a person was a normal speech, now the reality is that, you know, again, in normal conversation, you'd probably ask a few questions, but the first question probably says, what do you mean by hard, right? If we're not quite sure exactly what that means. Nonetheless, let's try another one. This woman is a quintessential politician. What do you think that means? And again, I'm not trying to be political here, but if somebody were to say, Elizabeth Warren, quintessential politician, what would you think that person would mean if they were a Republican, the opposite party? What do you think they'd be meaning by that? What are some of the stereotypes, the negative stereotypes of politicians? What do they do? You guys are asleep. Lie, right? What is any, could be that they're just really good at deception and such, right? So if a Republican was saying that about Elizabeth Warren, we probably would think, you know, okay, they're calling her a quintessential politician. They don't mean that. Now, what if it were, say, one of her staffers, and her staffer said, you know what, I work for Elizabeth Warren. She's the quintessential politician. What do you think the staffer would mean? Did you ever hear this, the slogan, all politics is the art of, somebody from last class said the art of deception. I said, yeah, it's probably true. That's not where I was going with that. Is that what you're thinking? The art of deception? You guys are cynical, more cynical than me. Politics is the art of, my mind is totally went blank. The art of compromise. In other words, you know, even though we may not like to admit it, sometimes you got to not just shoot for the middle ground, but you got to take what you can. If you're trying to do good, you can't always get exactly what you want, so you try to do what you can. And a person who's very diplomatic finds a way to talk in a way that they don't alienate the person opposite them. And in the midst of not alienating them, they're able to whack out a deal that at least does some good for the districts that they're representing. That's what we like a politician to do. So if the staffer would said, hey, I work for her, she's a quintessential politician, at this point we're understanding this is a good thing. But the reality is we're not quite sure what the person means by this term politician, right? So if anybody's ever like, you know, and again, we might do this with an inflection. Somebody looks up to you and says, nice hair. What do you think they might mean? They like it? Or here's a comb, you know? Can you do something about it? You're not quite sure, right? So equivocation, and most of the jokes and humor and such that we have, it's all based on this stuff, right? Let me see if I can't give you a few other, let's see. Oh. I heard, actually I heard this joke once. A guy went to a store and it was closed, but the sign said open 24 hours. And when he went the next day when they were open, he said, why were you closed? Your sign says you're open 24 hours. And he goes, well, we are, but just not in a row. Okay. All jokes like that, that's fun. You got to give me something. All jokes like that are based on equivocation. They're funny because we get that there's dual meanings that are embedded within the words and such. Okay? But in terms of critical thinking, they could really destroy our ability to communicate well. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, I found this article. I didn't put it up there, but it's actually an article from, I have the clip art right from the paper. Most doctors agree that breathing regularly is good for you. Right? I mean, they're probably talking about, you know, I don't know, maybe doing controlled breathing at certain points in life. Otherwise, we're thinking, yeah, breathing is good for us, that kind of thing. Or how about this? Puppies for sale. Come quick before they disappear. What do you mean disappear? What kind of magic puppies? You know, that kind of thing. So again, just it's one of the fallacies. And what I tried to do here is I tried to pick at least, and even in the order that I see them, appearing, at least in frequency, 4 or 5 fallacies that we can ferret out as we move through various things, especially in the case studies that we're going to be doing coming up. Have we heard of the slippery slope before? Have we heard this? Head nods, please. Okay. Supposing an inevitable directional step without good reason. Now, this one's an important one, and we'll also look exactly when it is and is not a slippery slope, right? So if somebody were to make an argument like this, I don't know, you flip on the news and there's some talking head there, and they say, they're not allowing concealed weapons to be carried on the college campus. Before long, they're not going to let anybody defend themselves at all. What do you think of that? What's wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with it? If it is, what is wrong with that?
The leap between what's currently happening and the conclusion of
Okay.
it.
In other words, I'm not sure if I have. You really can't make a strong link between a college campus, one that perhaps is private, and you're not necessarily free citizens in the sense that you have all the rights that you would on a public street. So you really can't make a causal link between these two, right? So again, forget about what you think about gun controls. There's nothing about that. When you get into these arguments, or by say, when you're listening to these arguments, you just put your own position aside to the point that you're disinterested so that you can kind of ferret out what they're trying to say. In other words, in Pennsylvania, as long as a person has a legitimate concealed carry permit, they can walk up and down the street, and they're free to do so. But they could not come onto a college campus. It's two different things. So when a person's trying to say, and you're going to hear these all the time, right? They're trying to, because they're doing this, therefore they're going to do that. Now, one of the guys in the court, in the section before, was saying, well, this sounds like it's almost relative, like it's very subjective. And I was trying to make the point that it sort of, yes, depending on how you're understanding that, but let me say this, it's only relative according to the strength of the correlation. Okay, so years ago, when smoking in public places was not an issue, you'd walk into a bar that's sold food or didn't sell food, and everybody was smoking. It's something you could do. If you didn't like, you could get out. That type of thing. At some point, they said, what we're going to do is if it's a restaurant that serves food, it has to have a non-smoking section. Some people made the argument, well, if you're going to restrict smoking to a non-smoking section simply because it's a public place and it serves food, how soon until the entire establishment is not going to be allowed to have cigarette smoking in there? That's not a half bad argument, is it? It's exactly what happened, right? Because, have you guys ever been to restaurants that had smoking sections? No? Well, good for you. But usually there was a wall about this high between the smoking and non-smoking section. It didn't make a lot of sense why the person over there can be puffing away and you're over here going, thank you very much, right? Now, so the reason why I say that, and we're going to play a little bit more about that, is a slippery slope is not a fallacy ipso facto. Now, it could be a fallacy if the connection is not good. Like if somebody were then to say, and trust me, I've heard people make these arguments, they're not letting us smoke in restaurants anymore. How soon will it be if they don't allow us to smoke in our own house? You see the different connect, that's a fallacy. Now, it's a fallacy because the connection between a public eatery and your private house are two different things. So you really don't have the same structure that you're trying to apply as far as the reasoning for your argument. The initial reasoning might be is that, look, this is a public establishment, worried about public health, and the government has a right to make some sort of advocacy for people in a public environment. But your house is not public. It's your house. And even if somebody, which somebody last class said, but could they at least try to pass laws like that? Who would enforce these? You can have the owner of an establishment almost be the enforcer for their particular restaurant, but you're not going to have somebody going around trying to catch somebody smoking in their own house. The two things. So when you hear things like, and again, You'll see this in gun control, you'll see it in marriage issues, just you name it. There's all kinds of things that pop up like this, and oftentimes somebody will throw out, well, that's a slippery slope. But you gotta determine, is it a slippery slope fallacy? And the way that you do that is try to identify what is the principle that they're using. In other words, once I identify the principle that they're using, then I can say, does that principle have export to something else? If it does, then it's a slippery slope, but it's not fallacious. There should be a real concern for that. If there is no real connection between the two, then you're in a fallacy. And again, these fallacies aren't always exclusive. You'll see as we get closer to the next one or two, it could be a deflection. All you're trying to do is argue. But just turn on the news and see if you can't get somebody trying to make the argument that once this happens, next thing you know, they're going to be doing this. And then see if they try to make the argument on the principle. If they make the argument on the principle, does that principle have export to anything else? If it does, then it's a concern. It's not a fallacy. If it doesn't, then all they're doing is throwing smoke up in the air at you, okay? Ad hominem. Do we know what that means? Anybody go to a Catholic school here and take Latin? Maybe they don't do that anymore. Arguing to the person rather than the point. I'm going to give you two different types of these, just because. I mean, you go on the internet and type in logical fallacies and you'll get pages after page. I'm just trying to bring some that I think might be helpful for us as we move on throughout the course. All right? So, if somebody's talking about advocating for the poor, and you're listening to their arguments, and you say to them, how can you really be concerned with the poor? Look at the house you live in. It's got 5 bedrooms and 3 baths. Right? Now, all you've done is not address their point. All you've done is gone after them. Now, somebody in the last period said, would you have a point? Perhaps. But it really wouldn't be the way to have an argument. Remember, an argument is not a quarrel, right? If you're like a Dorothy Day type and you try to live a voluntary poverty, or let me put it this way, if you are truly concerned about global climate change and such, right, and you're trying to be an advocate by living as simple as possible and not using travel anywhere that you can, it does make your argument stronger, doesn't it, if you're that person. But it doesn't do any good just to trash the person else, so you're so concerned about the environment and where you're going on spring break. That kind of thing. You might have a point, but all you've done is gone after the individual. That's an ad hominem attack, right? So you might want to start the whole discussion out in a different tone. You might say, well, first of all, those are some good ideas that you have to help the poor, but it's hard for us to really understand some of the things that they go through, isn't it? It's like, if we don't kind of live a little bit like they do we really understand everything that's involved with that? Do you find it difficult because of the, it's not your fault that you're born in that level of income, but do you find that hard then to be advocating? Do you think that perhaps, a lot of what we're talking about should be voluntary, helping them rather than somebody forcing it out of you, that type of thing? A lot of ways you can go about the discussion, but this happens all the time. You watch the news, you're not going to get to the news 5 minutes before you see somebody trying to beat up the next person. And it's really because they don't want to go after the absolute point. It's just easier to trash the other individual. Okay, ad hominem. The other one is tu quoque. It's the you too. So maybe you're sitting home at Christmas and you thought your parents are going out for a night. You're 19 years old. They come home and they catch you downstairs drinking a beer. Right off the bat. What are you doing? You're not even 21 years old. You're trying to get me in trouble? You're drinking alcohol in this house. Yeah, well, I was talking to Uncle Joe and he says you were drinking when you were 15. Might be true, but not exactly the argument that you want to throw back. In other words, you don't tell somebody just because you've done something that is not right, therefore I can do something not right. It's an attempt to make the other person look, hypocritical and such. But he can easily, or she, depending on your mom, can just easily come back and say, yeah, but it wasn't right when I did it, it's not right when you did it. So it's not really the argument, okay? But nonetheless, we do this quite a bit. It's will look for some sort of defect in the other person that's similar to ours, and then we'll call them out for doing it. If they're doing the same thing while we're doing it, yeah, they are hypocritical. If they did it 25 years ago, it could just be that they knew it wasn't right now. They matured, that type of thing. Okay. Ignoratio lancia. All right, so this is where you're going to do two things. I'm going to talk about the straw man, and I'm also going to talk about just the flat-out deflection, which these are all really deflection. You've heard of the straw man argument before? I don't believe in evolution. I didn't come from apes. It's not really what biological evolution is, right? So what you've taken is the absolute weakest form of that particular argument, and then you beat that up. And then it gives you a sense of, empowerment, right? I've overcome this person's, how do you want to say it, their logical forming, but you really haven't, because all you've done is taken the absolute weakest part of their premises and beat it up per se. Let's see what else we have. Oh, how about that one that's up there? So you work two different jobs, you're a single mom and work two different jobs, and then you say you love your kids. How can you be spending any time with them? You can imagine, right? It may sound silly coming out of you. But the reality is that you can't, well, let's just leave it there. There are all types of deflection. If you don't want to talk about the particular argument that's being put forth, you look for something else. Here's a red herring. You've heard of red herrings before? You go home this summer, your parents are checking out your GPA, and they're like, what's that C? Why did you get a C in that course? Mom, all you ever worried about is my grades. See right away? I know we all did that, growing up. You're trying anything you can to get out from underneath the particular argument that you're in, rather than to address what they're saying per se, all right? So, the last one is my pet peeve, which is why we're covering it. Bumper stickers, right? Political slogans. Even we're going to look at law. Let me say it this way. I know who Miley Cyrus is. I'm saying that so you know that's cool. My wife, we were watching a video of her. What's the one song she sings? Like the Climb, right? Okay, so I'm sitting there. My wife puts it on, and I'm listening to the words, and I'm like, that's pretty interesting. I said, that has a lot to do with existentialism, and almost like if you read Camus' Myth of Sisyphus, it's the struggle that people go through, not particularly the goal. To look at my wife at one point and said, can you just be quiet? That type of thing. So I refuse to put political signs in my yard. I just won't do it. I do my best to stay neutral. I am a true registered independent and have nothing against people being in a particular party. It's just not for me. So when politicians that I happen to meet say, well, would you put this sign in your yard? I'm like, nope. They're like, are you voting for me? Actually, I am voting for you. Then why don't you put your sign? Because I can't defend all your particular points of view. I don't even agree with all your points of view. I think, sorry, the lesser of two evils. That's how it's going to work. So I used to get teased like this with my friends and my wife. So what I did was, I thought, well, you know what? I did this about 10, 12 years ago. I came up with like 6 principles that I would stand by. And it didn't support a candidate, but I said, those are the 6 principles that I stand by, and whatever candidate lines up best with those, you're going to get my vote. So I went down to Staples, and I had a big sign made with these things printed out, and I had it laminated, and I mounted it to a piece of plywood, and I stuck it in the front yard, and my wife was like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, this is my political sign. She goes, and who can read that? You're going to have to park the car and get out and sit on a bench and read through that. I said, I don't care. I could defend every one of those things. You should have seen how proud I was when somebody actually knocked on the door and said, I want to discuss your sign. I was like, I know it's just one person, but I felt vindicated, right? So it's a pet peeve with me with slogans. Because and it doesn't matter if I agree with them or not. The problem with the slogan, and when a slogan becomes a fallacy, is when it's accepted as an argument. And I've got some examples for you. And I'm gonna trash all sides, so you don't think I'm favoring one. What does pro-life mean? When somebody says they're pro-life, what does that mean? Come on, I know you know. Yeah.
It like means that they believe that life starts at conception.
Okay. All right.
Even abortion.
If somebody said they were pro-life, would you assume they're against the death penalty? Would you assume that they're pro-immigration? Probably not. They could be. I'm not saying they're not, right? But see, that's part of the problem. And what does that phrase really mean? That bothers me. And it has nothing to do with, be disinterested here. We're not arguing about that as an ethical issue right now. I mean, we'll get into that. We'll argue about abortion, euthanasia, and those types of things. It's just not, I'd rather hear somebody tell me what it is that you stand for, right? In other words, there's other ways to say it. A person could say, I'm for a unified system of life. From conception to death, I think the individual is important, and all things in between. Okay, there's no slogan there, but at least I can start ferreting out what that individual believes, right? Now, so you don't think I'm hitting one side, what does that mean? My body, my choice. That's a slogan. What does it mean? Come on, I know what you know what this means too. You again? Go ahead.
It means that it's up to like the individual person whether or not they want their preference thing.
Yeah, so it has to do, again, we're talking about abortion. Do you think people who are saying that who would use my body, my choice, do you think they'd be advocates for those who refuse to get vaccinations? Did you ever think about that? If we're talking about bodily autonomy, then why would they not support people that are anti-vax? Or how about, let's say it this way, and you might be thinking I'm being nitpicking about this, but I am. That's the whole point of critical thinking and logic. It's to show that some of these things, because here's my point, is that a slogan, the word itself, its term, it had this origin of being like a rally cry for Scottish clans. So it's meant to like rally the troops. And we started out this conversation the other day by saying we have to be, the benefit about being a critical thinker is that we don't allow the veracity of the argument to be determined by the level of outrage. Well, slogans rally the troops. They become very emotive. And it could be that it's a way to gather things together, but then could we assume what they mean by hearing that slogan? I mean, there's a lot, in other words, a person who says, I have ultimate authority over my body would have to argue, therefore, I could sell a kidney. Why is that illegal? It's my body. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's ridiculous, but, this is the nitpicking in the back of my head. So if a person, again, if what they mean by that is that it's a woman's choice whether or not to keep their child, to keep the child, I'd rather not hear the slogan. I'd rather just hear that, because anybody who signs on to that, I know what they agree with. This, I'm not entirely sure, all right? When Barack Obama came out and said he's for hope, who would disagree with that? Despair. I'm all for despair. It doesn't matter what your feelings about Barack Obama. This isn't beating him up. And again, I understand what these things are. And I think, I don't know if it was an actual slogan, but I think Bill Clinton used it his first time. I think he was actually from a place called Hope, Arkansas, if I remember right. So he would say, I come from a place called Hope. That's equivocation, isn't it? Because he comes from a town called Hope, but he was trying to give everybody the impression that if you vote for me, you're voting for hope. Now, again, I'm not saying that what you liked about Barack Obama wasn't embedded in that, but it doesn't sit well with me, all right? Doesn't matter what you think of Donald Trump. This isn't about whether you like the individual or not. If you didn't know, if you never heard that before and somebody said, we should make America great again, are you going to stand up and say, I don't think so? If you're an American, of course you want to do that. It just draws people in. So the whole point to this isn't that slogans are fallacies. It's that slogans become fallacies when we read an argument into them. Remember, part of what we're trying to do is determine, are we even hearing an argument? Or is it just an exclamatory sentence? In other words, I don't like religion. I think it's for people that don't think for themselves. You're not having a discussion. Nobody's offered you premises. All they've done is given you some dogmatic sentence. Again, you might as well hear somebody say, I believe in the Bible. Why? Because God wrote it. Where does it say that? It says it in the Bible, right? The circular understanding. So these things tend to like gather us together, but I don't think they're good for us overall. And if you disagree with me, which you perfectly could, think of where they're utilized most. Besides politics, where else are slogans utilized all the time?
Like brands.
Yeah, brands, advertising. They're doing the same thing. They're trying to get you to buy into a generalization, and if you start to ask too many questions about that particular brand, then you're kind of missing it. And they just don't think about it. Just, come on, aren't you with it? Like, just go with it, or whatever it might be saying for the particular brand. They're trying to appeal to an emotive aspect of us, which is important, right? Because we're incarnate beings, so we do respond to emotions, but we don't want to be driven solely by those. Remember what I told you is that the more that we can ferret out the particular argument that's being used, the freer we are. So don't let somebody tell you something because this basketball player wears these sneakers, therefore this sneaker is of value. It could mean of nothing to you. Remember I told you about when I was younger, they wear the tags on the outside, right? So that somebody could see that particular brand. Today, people just buy the shirt right on the outside, Old Navy. Somebody has taught us, basically trained us to advertise. Remember when I told you about Betty Crocker and the instant cake mix? I mean, all of that. Those are all ways that kind of like get ways to build into this, but slogans are used to manipulate if they're accepted as arguments, that type of thing. Okay? This was the last of what I would call the technical aspects of this. When we come in on Thursday, we're just going to be talking about what does it mean to be alive? Sounds silly. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be a person? And then we're going to start applying that to various things in the medical ethics. And then on Tuesday, we're going to come in and talk about all the different theories of personhood, because it's going to be extremely important for you in your evaluations, everything, on all the life issues, but cloning, artificial intelligence, all those types of things. Okay? Anything in particular? All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.